So to start with, as I said, what is Back from the Brink? Gems in the Dunes is one project within the national programme Back from the Brink. And Back from the Brink came about with the Rethink Nature organisations, which is made up of 7 NGOs, as you can see on this slide now. So Amphibian Reptile Conservation, Bumblebee Conservation, Butterfly Conservation, Bat Conservation, Plant Life, Bug Life and RSPB. And these organisations meet regularly and have done for a while, and they came up with the idea of having a joint project looking at a new way of working in partnership, so that they weren't working in isolation, but they were working together. It's very easy for one organisation just to focus on their species, when actually what the work they're doing benefits other species as well in other groups. So along with Natural England, the Back from the Brink programme was started. So we are National Lottery Heritage funded, and it's a project that covers the whole, well, Back from the Brink covers the whole of England, with £7.7 million of funding over 4 years. So we started in July 2017, so we've been going not quite 3 years. National Lottery Heritage Fund, sorry, I always get my words mixed up saying that, is the largest of our funders, providing 4.4 million. And as the screen shows, we've got a whole host of other funders supporting different projects in varying degrees. Here on the Sefton Coast for Gems in the Dunes, our main supporters were the Heritage Lottery Fund and the People's Postcode Lottery. So we've only got 2 real funders there. So Back from the Brink, throughout the 19 projects that are there, came up with 3 main objectives. So initially, to conserve the highest priority threatened species where they are found, to work together to provide integrated action and advice across all species, and to inspire a movement of people to discover, value and take action for England's threatened species. So that's what we're all working towards overall. Now, as I've mentioned, it's 19 projects spread out across England, and this map gives an indication of where the projects are. So there's lots happening down in the south and the southwest rather, with a few happening further north until we've got, if I put my pointer on, we've got the Sefton Coast project just here, which is us, Gems in the Dunes, and furthest north we've got Pine Martin project. So Gems in the Dunes is one of the 7 integrated projects, and we're working at a landscape scale, focusing on multiple species across the different taxa. And then there's 12 single species projects, which, as it says on the tin, focus on a single species. For example, ladybird spiders, shrill carder bees, or the Barbary carcopit moth. And they are, some are focusing on several sites where the species are found, others are focusing very, very closely on just the area, might be one very small patch where this one species is found. And depending on what the project is, what the species are that the project is focusing on, it depends on who is leading. So in our case, Gems in the Dunes is led by Amphibian and Reptile Conservation. So myself and my colleague Andrew Hampson work for Amphibian Reptile Conservation, and just by the nature of us working for them, there's going to be a focus on amphibians and reptiles. So the Sefton Coast is a key location for many species, including some of the rarest amphibians and reptiles in England. So Amphibian and Reptile Conservation are the experts on amphibians and reptiles, but we're working quite closely with Plant Life and Bug Life because we have other species, invertebrates and plants within the project. Now, in some parts of the country, Amphibian and Reptile Conservation, or ARC as I will refer to them as, actually own and manage nature reserves, but not up here in the northwest. So we're working in partnership with some of the landowners on the Sefton Coast, And you can see our local partners here on the Sefton Coast, Sefton Council, Natural England, National Trust, Ulster Rifle Range, Lancashire Wildlife Trust. And we're also working with a few of the golf courses. So we've got Hesketh Golf Course, Hillside Golf Course, and Southport and Ainsdale Golf Courses, where we're doing work with them to improve the habitat for the species. So up to now, I haven't really mentioned our species, so I will move on and say a bit about them and their habitats before going on to say about the work we're doing, then followed with a bit more detail about the species themselves. So we've got 6 key species in our project, which is fantastic. Some of the projects have got 15, 20 species, so they have got an awful lot of work to do and a lot of monitoring to do. So our key species we're focusing on are natterjack toads, the northern June tiger beetle, sand lizards, sea bryon, petalwort, and matted bryon. But on the coast, there are hundreds of more species that will also benefit from the work we're doing. And I've picked out a handful of images of species that we've come across whilst we've been out doing our work on our key species that benefit from the work on the sand dunes, because there's way too many to mention. So we've got a gold fringe mason bee, top middle we've got a southern marsh orchid, then we've got a common lizard, bottom left we've got a marsh hellebrine, we've got grayling butterfly, and we've got field gentian. But as I say, there's way too many to actually go into detail. So all of the species, particularly the primary species, benefit from open sand. So we've got a picture here of Devil's Hole, large blowout down at Formby, if any of you are familiar with the coast. So a photo taken in 2012 and then one in 2018. And although they're facing in opposite directions, we can see around the edges how the vegetation is actually, there's a lot more vegetation in 2018 than there was in 2012. And I've just picked out this couple of photos. It's the same thing happening all over the coast. And another way we can look at it is by looking at some aerial photos. So on both these aerial photos from 1945 and 2013, they show the same area of dunes just north of Sands Lake in Ainsdale, so just north of Pontins. And we can see the amount of light, or the amount of light areas on the left-hand 1945 photo compared to 2013, where there is very little light coloured areas, which shows the amount of sand that has been lost. And recent research has shown, by looking at all old aerial photos, has shown that there's about 81% of the burst sand has disappeared on the coast since 1945, which is an awful lot. We can also see how the coast is changing. So in 1945, the coastal strip went from what was railway line then to the edge of the sand dunes on the left and then onto the beach. And then in 2013, where the railway line was, we've now got the coast road, and we've got the front edge of the sand dunes much further out. So the coast has been accreting, it has been building up over time. And that's the case for some areas on the coast. Other areas, however, are eroding. Couple more aerial images, again, just highlighting the lost sand. This shot shows 4 pictures. We've got 1961, the Ainsdale Dunes without pontins. And then 1979, pontins has been there a fair few years. We can see less bare sand again. And then the pictures turn to colour. So we've got 1989, again, a lot less sand compared to 79. And then 2018, much less sand than 1989. So it's an ongoing process. And is, again, as I say, this is happening along the entire length of the coast, whether it's accreting or eroding. So the next slides, I'm going to move on to a bit about the habitat now and how and why they're so important. So we've got a couple of images here of a typical dunescape, where the sand hills, the dune areas, are covered in a mosaic of grass with large sand patches in between them. Going down into the lower section of the dunes, where we've got a nice shallow sandy pool formed in theory naturally. So however, this one in this image we have dug out in an area that we thought would be good for our species. So naturally the sand would blow out and create these shallow sandy pool areas, but over time, once a balance was reached, they would start to vegetate up with a variety of low growing flora. And in the right hand image, typical flora, we've got bird's foot trefoil, rest harrow, a variety of sedges and grasses, all stuff that likes it slightly damper than higher up on the dunes, but doesn't really grow to any great height. And that is ideal for 4 of our key species. So the natterjack toad, the sea bryum, the matted bryum, and the petalwort would all thrive in these areas. However, it doesn't take very long for conditions to change and for our pools to become really quickly vegetated up. So we've got reeds and rushes growing within the actual water pool area. And then we have the vegetation surrounding the pools increasing, and we lose our the open sand dune nature. And this has an effect on all sorts of animals. So our 4 primary species previously mentioned will all be affected by the over-vegetation seen in these photographs. But it also means that they become far more favourable to other species, such as dragonflies, newts, and even commoner amphibians, such as common toads. And the way they affect the natterjacks is by predating on them or just out-competing them. So the vegetation in the pools encourages dragonflies to lay their eggs, it encourages newts to lay their eggs, and the larvae of both creatures will predate on anything that moves in the pond. So natterjack tadpoles are a great snack for them. And then we've got common toads, common frogs, who like quite vegetated pools. In particular, the toads like to wrap their spawn around the vegetation. So they are just better able to survive. The over-vegetation around the pools means that sometimes the natterjacks can't actually make it to the pools to breed, so the vegetation acts as a physical barrier. So it stops them moving from pool to pool, and also stops them from getting from one area of dune where they might want to seek shelter and hibernate or sleep, and also to go hunting. So the scrub you can see around the edge of the pool in the top right-hand image can also affect the sand dunes. So typically the dunes around the pools would be nice and open with a mix of sand and marram grass. So the sand blows in and forms the sand dunes initially, and then the marram grass moves in and stabilises it. And this makes it an ideal place for the northern dune tiger beetle and also the sand lizard. But again, it doesn't take long for other vegetation to start moving in. And one of the problems we face on the coast is sea buckthorn on the top left and Japanese rose on the bottom right, both of which just expand and take over the dunes. And as you can see, these areas would once have been a mix of sand and marram. They're now completely vegetated over with no open sand, or any sand that there is shaded out, so is not suitable for the species. So the aim of the project is to try and improve areas of the dunes for all of our species. And our work can be split into 3 sort of main areas. So we have habitat management, where we're physically improving the habitat for the benefit of the key species and many, many other species. We're also carrying out survey and monitoring to record the primary species mainly, see how well or not they are doing, and also community engagement, raising awareness about the coast and its wildlife, both locally and nationally. And although they are sort of distinctly separate areas of work, they are all overlapping in some way. So the habitat work improves the dunes, but the survey and monitoring gives us an idea of how the habitat work is beneficial to the species, and gives us an idea of how well it's doing, if it's in the right area, and gives us an idea of where we could do it in the future. And then there's community engagement, which helps us to recruit the volunteers who help us with the survey and monitoring and help us to do some of the management work as well. So they're all very closely interlinked. So our habitat management work is split into two areas, with contractors and volunteers carrying out the works. So we're working at 10 locations on the coast to improve the habitat for the species, with a lot of Japanese rose removal, scrub removal, and the creation and rejuvenation of pools. So far, contractors have improved or removed scrub from about 2.5 hectares of dune, and they've rejuvenated pools covering an area of approximately 1.7 hectares. And got a couple of examples coming up next to show you the degree of work that we've been doing. With Rifle Range, one of our partners, and the left-hand image is an aerial view of the northern section of Olka. So it's only about 300 metres distance, this area that I'm showing you, and you can see prior to the project starting, it was virtually all vegetated up, and the frontal dunes had just very dense marram grass everywhere. This is not ideal for sand lizards and tiger beetles. Although marram grass is good for them, too much means that there's no burr sand and they're not able to, thrive. So after the project, you can see the right-hand aerial photo, the burr sand patches that we have been able to create using the contractors. So it's gone from pre-project to being pretty much 0% burr sand to around 20% burr sand, and that is ideal for sand lizards. So the patches all are fairly close together, which gives connectivity between the areas and should enable the species to move between them. And the pool work we've been carrying out with contractors, we had quite a long, narrow, over-vegetated pool on Cabin Hill with quite steep-sided slopes, so it didn't warm up particularly quickly. And we've worked with the contractors and the land manager, Natural England, to scrape it out, widen it, and increase the amount of burr sand around the edges so that it's making it much more suitable for natterjacks. And also the burr sand around the edges is much better for the other species too. So, our second bit of habitat management work involves volunteers. And as I mentioned, one of the aims of the project is to engage with local communities and get them involved. So we've recruited a team of volunteers who've been helping us with habitat management work. So they've cleared huge areas of scrub from the dunes, mainly sea buckthorn, but also willow, sycamore, and birch. And the area they've worked on totals about a hectare of land that's cleared, which is about 1 1/3 football pitches, to put it into context. And we have anything between 2, 3, 4, up to 15, 20 volunteers out at a time. It varies depending on the day, the weather, the location. So they're doing a great job clearing the scrub with us. And they've also worked on pools and cleared or rejuvenated an area of about 0.6 hectares. So again, another massive area, improving the pools for the natterjacks and the bryophyte species. So the volunteers are not only most helpful with our habitat management work, they're also helping us to see the benefits of that management work by helping us out with our survey and monitoring. And it's particularly important where we've done the work that we've been surveying, so we get an idea of how the benefits of carrying out the management work. So we've been running survey sessions training sessions for all the key species. So we've had sand lizard training, natterjack, tiger beetle, and then we've done bryophyte training for the 3 species of bryophytes all together. And we've been involving specialists to help us run these sessions so that people are getting the best out of, getting the best knowledge that they can. So we're aiming to give the volunteers as much knowledge as possible on identification, habitat requirements, and the skills to monitor the species. Also, several of our species are actually licensable. So the natterjack toad and the sand lizard both require a license to go out and monitor them because it's classed as an act of disturbance. So by attending the training and working with us to survey them, we can then add volunteers onto the license, so we know that it's all being done, and they have a level of knowledge and an understanding of surveying the species. So volunteers have helped us survey all of our key species in varying degrees. As I said before, the surveys are important to get an understanding of the abundance and distribution. So the next few slides, I'm going to tell you a bit more about the key species, and also look at where we've been surveying and the records we've gathered so far. So lumping our bryophytes together, the 3 plant species, they are all very small, which is good and it's bad. So we have people who really enjoy looking for small things and don't mind crawling around on their hands and knees, and then we have other volunteers who are just not interested in it at all, and they're just like, no thanks, you can keep your bryophytes. So the seabrium and matted bryum, we're talking about a leafy base about 1 centimetre tall, with short stems no more than 3 centimetres, with the capsules at the ends of these centimetres. So it is down on your hands and knees to identify them. And they are notoriously tricky to identify, being so small. So we use the capsules to actually help us identify them. Now, the last record we have for matted bryum on the coast was 1933, and unfortunately, we've not been able to find that as yet within the project. But we have successfully been able to find the sea bryum, and one of the ways we identify it is by the shape of those capsules, which are visible from late summer, early autumn into the later autumn, early winter months. So it was fairly well distributed along the Ainsdale and Birkdale section of the coast prior to 2013 and prior to the project starting. But we've seen a noticeable decline within those areas, and that is down to a change of the habitat. Now the petalwort, again, as I said, another small plant. We're talking about 5 to 10 millimetres across. It's green and it is found in and amongst other very short vegetation too. So it again is quite tricky to spot. It's distinguished by these sort of parallel lamellae which grow at right angles to the base, making it look a bit like a mini lettuce. It likes areas of dune that are damp but not too wet, as do the bryums, sorry, I should have said earlier, with a bit of trampling or lightly grazed. So in days gone by, we had plentiful records of petalwort in the 1990s down on the coast, but number of rabbits maybe have declined, and there's fewer people walking through the dunes, so the habitat is closing over slightly and it's being outcompeted. So when the project started, we knew it was known at 4 locations, and there were about 100 of these individuals, so not many of them at all. So the sea bryum you can see is mainly focused on the Ainsdale and Birkdale Local Nature Reserve north of Shore Road and Pontins, and at Devil's Hole, the large blowout at Formby. So pre-project, there was a lot more north of here on the newly forming Green Beach. And it was further inland, were on the edges of the dunes prior to the newest Green Beach forming. So you can see it's reduced greatly to just these two areas of pink dots. And even here, 2017, the records you can see, 2018 records, it's disappeared from quite a few areas in this northern section and even in the southern section as it's become over-vegetated. And petalwort, we can see distribution-wise, with having been at 4 locations in 2013, we found it now at over 15 locations and with over 2,000 counted. But it's still in a very small area. So although maybe not as affected as, in decline as previously thought, it's still not doing brilliantly. So moving on to the natterjack toads, the coast is extremely important for natterjacks. We've got about 25% of the population in the country here. So they're nocturnal and they have a distinctive yellow stripe right down the middle of their backs, and they like the shallow sandy pools. But they are facing the problems of over-vegetation, either in pools or around the pools, restricts movement between pools and to their areas for sleeping and feeding. In recent years, there's been a decline in survey activity, and in 2018, we counted 602 spawn strings, and there's an estimated 1,600 to 3,000 adults on the coast, so not huge numbers if we think about that on a national scale. Moving on to the sand lizards. They are secretive and notoriously difficult to spot, and which is one of the problems of getting any ideas of distribution and abundance. Here in Sefton, they're classed as a northern race, as they're very different in appearance to those from the south of England. There's native populations here on the Sefton coast and in the heaths of Surrey, Hampshire and Dorset, where they have a much darker coloration, obviously to blend in with their environment. And introductions have taken place over Wales and throughout southern areas of England too. They are difficult to see, so you would wonder how, seeing the greenness of the male in the top picture, but then you look at the bottom picture and you see the female, and very difficult to spot this in the sand dunes in the grass. So in the early 1900s, it was estimated we had 8,000 to 10,000 adults on the coast. And then in 1974, one of the national experts estimated that there were, at the time, there was about 250 adults, so a massive decline in that 70-odd years. However, seemed to be a bit of a recovery during the 70s into the early 2000s, when numbers seemed to be around between 1,000 and 1,500. However, pre-project, once again, numbers have dropped and we were down looking at 250 adults maybe on the coast. Now, maybe numbers are down because prior to the project starting, recording had been limited to a handful of keen individuals, and they are very weather dependent. So if, for example, I was one of those experts and it was like, right, I'm going to go out surveying this coming weekend. Fantastic if the weather is bright and sunny. However, if we've got a day like today, that is time that I've missed. So the aim of the project, we want to get some more people involved who might be able to go out more frequently. And we have actually managed to recruit a few volunteers to help us in that respect. And we have one guy who is going out. He literally looks at the weather forecast for tomorrow and goes, right, I can go out tomorrow, it's nice and sunny. And he's getting some great data for us. And that is giving us a better idea of numbers and distribution. And individuals can be identified by the patterns on their back. So our first season of sand lizard surveying in the project, you can see on the left, we've got a fair few yellow dots. mainly on the Ainsdale and Birkdale Sandhills LNR, and a few going on to the National Nature Reserve at Ainsdale, and also a couple further inland at a couple of sites where they've been known in the past. However, in 2019, with more survey effort, you can see the dots have extended and we're getting more records, which is absolutely great. So we know that they're surviving in more areas than we originally thought. As I say, it's difficult to get abundance and distribution because of the nature, them being so difficult to spot. But this is all key data that will help with future management work and looking at the benefits of improving the site for these species and others. Now, our final final key species is the Northern Dune tiger beetle, and they're one of 5 tiger beetle species found in the country, but these guys are only found at 2 places in England, on the sand dunes at Drigg in Cumbria and here on the Sefton coast. Both sites are at the northwestern edge of their range, although they are quite common within Europe. So they are probably my favourite species within the project, but don't tell Amphibian Reptile Conservation that. They're about 1.5 centimetres long, and they have a distinctive iridescent brown bodies with creamy coloured banding and iridescent green undersides. And they're most often found on the mobile fall dunes, on sandy tracks, and in blowouts within the sand dunes. And as you've guessed from me saying, the open sand is the key thing for them. They need bare sand in which to hunt and also to lay their eggs, but they need slopes of varying angles to hunt and to lay eggs in. So the egg laying slopes need to be much flatter so that there's less risk of the egg burrow collapsing. Steeper slope would see more risk of collapsing. Okay, so we have 2 coexisting populations of adults of tiger beetles on the coast, with adults that emerge in either April, May, or in July or August. And whichever population it is, they emerge from their burrows when the entrance reaches 19 degrees. And they are very, very temperature dependent. So when the burrow entrance reaches 19, they will start to emerge, and the sand warms up pretty quickly and gets really hot, which is why they do well down here on the coast. And they're looking to reach an optimal body temperature of 35 degrees. So when they emerge from their burrows, they will stay close to the sand, their bodies will be pressed down into it, and they're absorbing heat from within the sand. Once they reach that temperature, it then starts to get a bit too hot for them. And like us running across the sand, they'll be up on their tippy toes trying to not overheat. And this walking on their tiptoes is known as stilting. And if that doesn't help them keep cool, then they'll fly short distances again to cool down. They are dependent on the surface temperature. So if it falls below 28 degrees, they will go back into burrows, or they will dig new burrows. And if it goes above 42 degrees, they will seek shelter from the heat in burrows again. So these temperatures sound really high for the northwest of England, but we're talking about surface temperatures of the sand. And we know when we walk on the sand how hot it actually gets. So most of their time out of the burrow is spent hunting, and the net ground needs to be 28 degrees or above to make it worthwhile. So they're hunting invertebrates, so any small insects that they can manage to take down, and they use their huge jaws, mouthpieces, to capture the invertebrates. And they usually will take about 3 per hour. So the amount of food available affects the females and the number of eggs that they can lay. But she lays her eggs on the pretty flat areas of bare sand within the dunes, and in a burrow going down vertically. And the larvae, or the eggs, will hatch into larvae, and the life cycle will take 2 years before they turn into adults. So the larvae will go through 3 instars, 3 separate stages, before turning into an adult and hatching out in the appropriate May or August, depending which population they belong to. So in the past, pre-project, there was some ad hoc recording which took place, but with very patchy records. And a lot of the data gathered and information we have on the species was actually collected by Steve Judd from the museum there with his colleagues back in 2003 and 2010. So the project is aiming to build on that data. In this image, you can actually see the tiger beetle up on his tippy toes or her tippy toes, stilting to try and maintain their critical body heat. So again, volunteers have been helping us survey for beetles, and we can see on the left-hand photo the records for 2018. Concentrated around the Ainsdale and Birkdale sandhills and onto the National Nature Reserve at Ainsdale. Also at Devil's Hole in Formby, and then a fair few down at Cabin Hill and Olka. Now, it's good that we're getting records at all of these places, but in particular, Cabin Hill and Olka, because they are two of the areas where we first carried out work on the coast. And we did the work in early 2018. So the summer of 2018, we saw tiger beetles had moved onto the sites where we'd cleared the vegetation. So they're moving quite quickly. And 2019, again, we had good records. This year, we are well down on our record taking because of the current situation, but we are hoping that restrictions lift pretty soon and we can go out and we can start doing a bit more recording. So although we've missed the May population, we've still got the August population to look forward. So the 2019 map shows, again, large numbers of beetles down on the Ainsdale, Birkdale, LNR and National Nature Reserve, extending a bit further down than we had in 2018. And again, more records down in Formby and even a couple down in Hightown. But we still have gaps. And on all of our species maps, you will have noticed gaps. And those gaps are for a variety of reasons. For example, with tiger beetles and sand lizards, if we plan a day of surveying and it turns out that the weather is not suitable, then, we've lost a day's survey because the animals don't come out unless the weather conditions are exactly to their liking. We've got 20 odd miles of coast to cover. So we've got a big area to cover. So it's fitting in all the sites, suitable sites within the times that we have. And also the number of volunteers. As I mentioned with the plants, we've got several people who love the plants. They're not interested in the animals and vice versa. But we're quite greedy as a project. We never have enough volunteers. We're constantly on the hunt for new ones. And so we've got a few tiger beetle surveyors and we've got a few sand lizard surveyors and we've got quite a lot of natterjack surveyors. And it's all to do with people's liking, preferences. So we're still looking for new volunteers to help us get a better coverage and more idea of the spread and distribution and numbers of the species. And that is why we have our community engagement programme. So over the project, we've been carrying out walks, talks, events, activities to engage with the local community. We've been out on the sand dunes, we've been into local schools, we've had run sessions down at the museum there in Liverpool, talking about the project and trying to get people enthused. So as you can see, we've got all age ranges engaged, and we've also, by doing a variety of activities, we're hoping to engage with a huge range of different people and hopefully get some of those people really sort of enthused and able to want to come out and help us improve their local environment and the wildlife and help the wildlife that lives there. So we've been doing this on a local basis, but also on a national basis. The national team back from the brink last summer ran a series of arts events working with artists across the country to engage with different audiences. So there's lots of people who enjoy doing different things, but they don't necessarily have an overlap. So there's lots of artists out there who wouldn't even think of coming down to the dunes. So we put on days for painting, drawing, creating cyanotypes, and using porcelain to make little sort of like Christmas bauble sort of shapes, actually out on site on the dunes. So we, Andrew and myself, talked to the participants, and our artists gave people tips and help on doing the painting, the drawing, and the other activities. And then we followed this up with Habitat Management Day combined with an art activity day. So, and as a result, we had several volunteers sign up who admitted that they would never have thought of doing anything within the environment, habitat management work or surveying work, but they now see that there is a link and how that they can do their passion for art and also get involved in the local environment. Unfortunately, not all of those volunteers that we managed to recruit have been able to come out with us because of the current situation. So we are constantly hoping that the situation changes soon, but we're constantly hoping to engage with new volunteers. And that's important for the future as well. Gems in the Dunes isn't going to be here for forever. So at the end of the project, we are hoping that we've improved the habitat greatly for the species, our key species and many other species, but also that there's a team of enthused volunteers who will carry on the good work into the future and work alongside the landowners. So the project is currently due to finish at the end of this year, so 31st of December 2020. However, we have missed this current survey season, and it's not just Gems in the Dunes. All the projects within Back from the Brink have missed the survey, a good chunk of their survey season this year. So the national team from Back from the Brink are currently looking to see if there's any way National Lottery Heritage Fund can extend our project for another 6 months so that we would be able to gather the data that we've missed that would help future projects. So fingers crossed we get something out of that. And also, should nothing come of that, Amphibian and Reptile Conservation, we are working towards other projects as follow-on projects to Gems in the Dunes, so that with a continued presence on the coast, focusing on the species. There's a lot of work goes on the coast, and it doesn't necessarily have a species focus. It's more of a landscape focus. So hopefully you have enjoyed me talking about the project, and apologies for it being such a whistle-stop tour. There's so much detail I could go into. It's really hard. So thank you for joining us today, and thank you to Gary and Leanna at the Taniptera project for inviting us along. It's been a great opportunity for us to talk about the project. If anyone would like further information, you can go to the Nature Back from the Brink website, www.naturebftb.co.uk, or you can go to @naturebftb for Facebook and Twitter. My email, should you wish to contact, is fiona.sunners@arc-trust.org. And finally, I would like to thank all the people involved in the project, whether it's the local landowners, our partners, our volunteers, people who we've been working with to help us with training, but also everybody whose photos I've used within this slideshow. Thank you for permission to use those. And as mentioned about the surveys, the images taken of Sandler's natterjacks and great crested newts have all been taken under license. So thank you very much, and time to hand back to Gary and any questions, I think.
Thank you very much indeed, Fiona. That was a really excellent overview of the project. I found it really interesting, especially where you've done so much work in creating bare sand at Altcar and the tiger beetles moving in straight away. I think when we did a Taniptera project recording day at Altcar last year, there was quite a bit of bare sand for us to survey for invertebrates. So there may be other things that have also come in that we might have picked up on, but I didn't realize it wasn't like that before. So it's an awful lot of work you've done there.
Yeah, it's really noticeable when you look at it on the aerial photos sort of thing. You get a bigger picture, and as you said, you didn't realise what area we'd worked on and how much had been cleared. And we're only touching such a small portion of that, the 20 odd miles of coast, you know, so there's a lot more that could be done in the future.
I think, well, I had a couple of questions, but I'll leave mine till the end, and we'll alternate between questions on the chat and then anyone sort of putting their hand up virtually or even physically if we can spot you. So the first one, I think, from Mary. To which recording system should ad hoc tiger beetle records be submitted?
We haven't submitted any of ours yet, but we would recommend people put them into Merseyside Biobank. And that's where, when we've gathered all our data for the project, we will be ensuring that all our records go to Merseyside Biobank. Okay.
Okay, do you have any follow-up on that, Mary? Hold on, I'm gonna unmute you, Mary, if it will let me. Yeah.
Okay, hopefully you can hear me. Thanks very much, Fiona. Really interesting talk, thank you. Great seeing the aerial photographs. As regards recording, Rod, who's also here, we walk in the area, we live locally, so we get ad hoc records. I do submit records to Mersey Biobank, so that's useful to know that you'll be able to pick them up at the end of the project. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I mean, if you wanted to send them over to us, as I say, for the next 6 months, that would be appreciated as well. We can add them into our set of data, because there's always a good chance that you might be in areas that we're missing data. So it would help us, you know, as well. And as I say, anything that you send in, although it would be duplicated when we send it to Biobank, I don't think there's any problem. It's better to get it twice than not at all.
And I know many of our Northwest invertebrate recorders use iRecord, but that would be okay too, because Mersey Biobank download the data from iRecord at regular intervals, so that will get to them that way as well. Right. So the next question is from Sarah B. Are there new records for any of the target species in the areas where you've done habitat management?
So far it's been tiger beetles at Olka. We have seen a few sand lizards down at Olka as well, but not specifically on the areas that we have been recording at. But they are fairly new. They are new records for Olka, because there's such restricted access down at Olka. You can only get on Fridays because they're firing the rest of the week, and then it's getting on with permission. So any air records at Olka are great. So they're the main two. The other areas we've done work at, we've not, tell a lie, sorry, that's the Natterjack pool that showed you on the typical sand dune system. We have had Natterjacks using that one, so that has been done by volunteers, and the Natterjacks have decided to use that last year, so that was really good. But sometimes it can take several years. So one of the downsides of the project being 3 years is that we might not actually see any species moving into those newly cleared areas. It might happen in year 4, year 5, year 6 down the line. So, yeah.
Thank you. Sarah, did you have any follow-up to that? I'm going to unmute you for a second in case you do. Okay.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. I've put in another question. wondering about whether it would be worth looking at translocation of bryophytes into new habitat areas.
It is a possibility, but it was something that was decided at the very start of the project that this project wouldn't get involved in that. One of the problems is making sure that the habitat is in exactly the right condition for them. And in lots of cases, it's still not entirely known exactly, all the criteria that they might need, in particularly the case of pecklewort. Also, as well as the habitat needing to be in pristine condition to bring in the new individuals, it would need to make sure that you had an appropriate management system within place to keep that ongoing. And as ever, that comes down to funding, and I don't think most of the landowners are in a position at the moment to be able to offer that sort of continued input. So it has been discussed, and it does regularly get brought up, but at the moment it's not something that's happening.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, so next one from Rod. Are there any known or suspected factors attributed to the rise and fall of target species over time?
Sorry, say again, Gary.
Are there any known or suspected factors attributed to the rise and fall of target species over time?
I mean, the main factor is the loss of sand. So if we're continuing to lose sand, the amount of available habitat is continually being squeezed, it's getting less and less. And also, if species are being squeezed into smaller areas, they're getting isolated, and that is, a big concern, that we've got pockets of lizards who are cut off from other pockets of lizards. We've got natterjacks who tend to use similar pools each year, getting cut off from other pools, and you start getting a case of inbreeding. So there's a lot of factors affecting that. The other rise and fall in figures and numbers might be slightly attributed to the amount of recording going on. Natterjacks used to be really well recorded when I first started working on the coast 20 years ago, and then the number of staff working on the coast declined. There wasn't necessarily huge numbers of volunteers, so records went down. So in some cases it might be that there's a lack of records, and then as you get more people recording, numbers appear to go up. So a combination of factors is probably affecting ups and downs in populations.
Rod, did you have any follow-up on that? I'll unmute you.
Okay. Yeah, one of the things that came up was the lizards and their fall to the 70s and their gradual rise again to the 2000s and their drop off again. So, but the last part where they increased in number to about into the early 2000s, and there was a decline again over a relatively short period. So what would that be attributed to?
As I say, it could just be the amount of recording and weather conditions, something as simple as that. As I said, we've got a handful of dedicated recorders pre-project. One of them lives in the Lake District, one lived in Sheffield, one lives in Liverpool, which is fairly local, but all of them work, so they were quite restricted in the times they could get out. Whereas previous records being carried out by people who might have been retired, really dedicated, had lots of time. So we're not entirely sure why the numbers went down so much, but it is thought that there's a combination of lack of recording and also them getting cut off, isolated in areas as scrub has encroached around them, and also possibly visitor pressure in some areas. Although having said that, there's several lizards up on the sand dunes right close to the beach entrance at Ainsdale, and they seem to, just get on with things and not be affected by visitor pressure. So there's a whole variety of factors. We're not entirely sure is the overall response. But hopefully within the project, we're going to get more records and we'll get a better idea of numbers, although it is difficult to say.
Yeah, sounds like a major factor is funding.
Yeah, like with all these things, funding, and time, and also the duration of projects. You know, you'll get lots of funding for a year, 2 sustainability, 3 years, but it needs some sort of sustainability. You know, to help get a better idea of things.
Okay, thank you. So the next question I've got is from Roy. If walking through the dunes and encounter a sand lizard, can it be photographed using a telephoto lens?
If you are out walking in the dunes and you come across it, and yes, take a photo of it. If you go out and specifically look for them, that is when it would be classed as disturbance, and which is why you would need a license. It's a very fine balance between, but you know, lots of people will go out for a walk and they will, well, not lots, but a fair few people will go out and they will see a lizard. They will just happen upon it, and it's always great to take a photo. That is just, you know, as it happens. But you do get a lot of people down there specifically looking for the lizards, and constantly going to the same areas and photographing the same one, and that is where the disturbance sort of issue comes in.
Thank you. Did you have any follow-up on that, Roy? No? Okay. Thank you. So I've got the next question from Terry. How much damage does human activity, e.g. walkers, campers, do to the dune ecosystem and the target species?
A good question, and quite a mixed sort of answer. It's good to have people walking within the dunes because they do keep areas open. And you notice that at Altker, where you don't have any walkers on the site throughout the dunes, there's very few open pathways and tracks. Whereas compared to Cabin Hill, next door, the site next door, where there are several tracks going through. So in the past, records at Altker for sand lizards have been very low. Up until 2013, there were good records of sand lizards at Cabin Hill. Numbers declined because there was a fire there in 2000, a massive fire down there, maybe in 2013, so numbers declined maybe as a result of that, and there's been less recording since then. But too much walking and too much activity in certain areas can cause damage. So, for example, if everybody decides they're going to walk across the open sandy patch and it's where the sand lizards or the tiger beetles lay their eggs, then that's going to cause disturbance and potential destruction of the eggs and loss of future animals. So it's a fine balance between how much activity there is, and you don't want to stop it all because it over vegetates very quickly, but you don't want too much because it can cause big areas of erosion and take it too far the other way.
Thank you. Did you have any follow-up on that, Terry? It looks like you do, so I'm going to unmute you. Or you could shake your head, but there you go.
Okay. Yeah, just one thing, Fiona. There's been a lot of bad press over the last week or so about parties and all sorts that have gone on down my end of the Sefton coast in Crosby, and the feeling that there's a lot of damage being done, things like skylark nests, the dunes themselves. I wonder if anything similar has actually happened up higher up around the Fulmy area.
Yes, I mean, there's been a couple of fires along the coast which have potentially wiped out, you know, could have wiped out. Oh, excuse me, sorry. which could have wiped out sadly the populations. So yes, the increased pressure on the sand dunes at the moment is causing potential, problems, particularly in the busy areas. And we know there are hot spots on the coast that attract people. But even some of the quieter areas, the more remote areas, people are venturing that bit further now because they can't travel great, or haven't been able to travel great distances. So yeah, so it is happening all along the coast. Obviously our focus is our key species, but yes, for the likes of skylarks and other ground nesting birds, it is a huge problem. And it's difficult to manage at the moment because of lack of resources to manage it. A lot of that being staff to go out and manage, and be out on site and deal with the increased number of people.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
And then I'll just, I suppose, add to that on the human activity in terms of the scarab beetle I mentioned before Fiona started. That's probably helping the beetle in terms of where I found it, and there's very mobile areas and very popular areas at Formby Point and Freshfield caravan site, quite popular with people in the back of the dunes, probably keeping it open, probably helping the scarab beetle. But the amount of litter, looks like there's been a festival that's gone on there, and where I've been, it's been pretty depressing to say the least. But just that footfall is probably doing a good job of keeping some of the areas open, which favour the endangered scarab beetle. And I suppose one other thing to say with creating lots of new pools for the natterjacks, I'm just thinking of another beetle, an aquatic weevil, which is very rare only in Norfolk and one other in Brecon in Wales since the World War II. Is very extremely rare. Beetle occurs in a couple of the slacks, which are mature. They would have been natterjack. One of them has just gone over as used to be a natterjack toad slack, but leaving them to mature and getting the food plant Potamogeton gramineus to develop in them is creating that suitable habitat for this very rare Bagoas lutosus aquatic weevil. So yeah, so with the lots of new pools have been created, that's maybe in 20 years time you're getting suitable habitat or less, going forward a good future for that beetle as well. Don't know.
Yeah, I've just noticed something pop up on screen about dogs in ponds. I'm not sure who it came from, but yeah, dogs in ponds is a big problem on the coast for the natterjacks, for the tadpoles and the spawn, and it's part of our engagement, to try and work with people. People enjoy coming out with their dogs. We're not going to stop it. You need to get them on your side and work with them, and maybe direct them to pools which are less sort of desirable to the natterjacks, or to the beach for their dogs to have a swim and a drink, and explain to them why they are causing problems, for the wildlife. And lots of people, when we ask them, can you keep your dogs out of the ponds for this duration while the natterjack toads, it's breeding time, they're more than happy, and they're like, oh, I didn't know anything about them, sort of thing. So it's a tricky one, and it is a problem, and it's something that's not going to go away, I don't think, but we just need to work with it. I mean, some pools are fenced off. It can work, it doesn't always work. People will cut the fencing, people will lift their dogs over. There's all sorts going on. So yeah, it's not our dogs in ponds are not our favourite sort of topic.
And then Sarah's just reminding me about a couple of questions I put at the top. So the decline you'd mentioned at the beginning from 1945 until I don't know, was it 2013 or something, there was an 81% decrease in bare sand. And I think you've mentioned about the reduced grazing, maybe grazing from rabbits, etc., as one factor. Is that the main cause? Are there other really causes why there's been such a depletion in bare sand over those decades?
I mean, rabbits were the main grazers on the dunes for many, many years. So in the late 50s, early 60s, when there was myxomatosis outbreak, that has sort of, really resulted in a reduction in rabbits, a reduction in grazing, and an increase in species growing up and becoming scrubby trees and woodland. But one of the things that after the war, 1945 onwards, lots of people would be out and about holidaying on the dunes and would be active in the sand dunes. And there's loads of photos of people down here at Ainsdale being out and about on the sand dunes. So they would have helped keep the coast open. And then as you move into the 50s, 60s, and holiday destinations start getting a bit more further afield, availability of flights, there's less people using the coast in that extent. And once the vegetation gets a hold, then it's very difficult to slow that process down. I mean, the Japanese rose, it increases by, I think it's 20% each year. So, that is a huge amount of vegetation increase. So it's not long that you start off with a small amount of vegetation and that just grows and grows and grows very quickly. There's also, there's been coastal squeeze, so there's been building work squeezing the coastal area, there's coastal zone area. And with more industry, more cars on the road, you've got a lot more nitrogen in the atmosphere, and climate change. All things combined, I think, are reducing, working together against us having more bare sand.
And did you want to ask anything else in relation to that, Sarah? I'll unmute you.
Yeah, I guess it was just my very basic understanding of a sand dune system. You move from the sea and beach through mobile dunes, gradually getting more vegetated and becoming fixed. And from the photos that you've shown, there are no mobile dunes at all. It's just an edge and a vegetated area in the beach. Is that the squeeze, or is it the weather? Is it that we're not having storms that would turn up that edge of the dune and make it mobile? I don't know.
Different areas of coast, some are eroding, some are accreting. So here at Ainsdale, we have got embryo dunes and mobile dunes forming, but they're forming at a slower rate, and the amount of sand being blown in is much reduced.
Okay.
So whereas that would normally, in a typical dune system, it would keep rolling back, and it would roll back, and you would eventually end up with the climax community of a birch woodland. That birch woodland would be on areas where we've now got housing estates.
Yes.
So it is getting squeezed. We've got embryo, mobile and fixed dune, but we're not moving into the final stages. So it's down to the nature of the shape of the coast and population change, and all sorts of factors affecting it. So your basic knowledge is not such basic knowledge, it is good knowledge of the coast, and what it should be like. But a combination of factors is just, reducing the way the dunes are forming. So we're not getting as many new habitats, as many new slacks blowing out as we would have done many years ago.
Okay, thank you.
And grazing practices must have changed over the decades as well. It's well documented. A number of dung beetles have gone extinct, and most of them need dung all year round. And I know that there's not much grazing going on during the winter, is there? Which sort of, if you sort of don't have the food for them all year round, then they will disappear. And and so they won't have that vegetation they're feeding off as well, which of course doesn't help. So, but I suppose that must have changed a lot over the years with different management decisions going on.
Yeah, I mean, rabbits were the main grazers, and to supplement them, the coastal managers have brought in sheep and cattle onto different areas to try and help with the reduced number of rabbits. Rabbits will take vegetation to a certain height because it's nice and juicy. Once it gets above a certain size, it gets a bit woody and a bit tough, and they're not interested. And then that's where your sheep and your cattle, or horses even, play a greater part. But it's getting the grazing regimes in the right proportions. It's having it not understocked, not overstocked, because you want to take out certain amounts of vegetation but not destroy it, and that is quite critical. And also the farmers who put their animals on to the coast to graze, they also want their animals to be getting, a certain amount of nutrients, because they are many of them are of commercial value back on the farm, sort of thing. So it's a very fine balance these days when it does come to grazing, and keeping it open to the right extent that all the wildlife likes and enjoys.
Well, I suppose I'd just really like to thank Fiona for and taking many questions and answering them very comprehensively, and thank you for everyone for joining us. As I say, we've got 3 more of these in June, and I hope you can join some of those. And we're lining up July's as well. If people wanted to join you as volunteers, Fiona, if they're able to do much field work before the end of the season, how would they do that?
Drop me a quick email, and that's probably the easiest. I mean, we are hoping, we're under current restrictions of going out and surveying, of landowner restrictions. Landowners haven't given permission for volunteers to be going out and surveying yet. Andrew and myself are allowed out on a low key level to do some survey work, but it's a massive area to cover. So we are hoping that the landowners lift these restrictions soon, and then we would probably be looking at mainly focusing on the tiger beetles in July, August. So we've still got a month or so for, in an improved situation to come out. So drop us an email and we can get you signed up, and hopefully get you involved in some way or another. And then we'll just be monitoring the situation ongoing as to how and when we can get on with any habitat work. Like everything else, it's all up in the air. So,
well, that's great. Well, best of luck with the rest of the project, and I hope it is extended due to this situation, and you can get as much done as possible, because it's great work. It's gonna help for many years to come. It's gonna make a big difference. Okay, well, thank you very much, everyone, and hopefully see you again soon, and even in the field, hopefully, once our recording days get back underway in due course.